Hi, everyone, and welcome to every episode of VeggieTales Reviewed. I'm that media guy, and I'm here to answer your questions about the quality of talking Christian vegetable television. Today, we have the subject of Episode 2. God wants me to forgive them? Now, like the first episode, this episode is split up into two segments. However, unlike the first episode, which featured an adaptation of a Bible story and an original story, albeit with an unoriginal name, this episode has two spoofs, one of classic literature and one of pop culture. That's right, this episode features takes on the Grapes of Wrath and Gilligan's Island, with talking vegetables. Sounds quite a bit sillier than the first episode, right? Well, it is. Conceptually, this episode sounds comparatively goofier, and in execution, it is quite a bit different as well. For starters, while the last episode only had narration from an unnamed narrator for the second segment and nothing for the first, this episode has Larry telling the story of the Grapes of Wrath and Bob telling the story of Larry's Lagoon. Although the beginning of the segment has both Bob and Larry introducing us to their 3-hour tour. The first segment even cuts back to the countertop multiple times during the segment so Bob and Larry can comment on what is happening within the story. This leads us to the penultimate form of silliness, Junior breaking the fourth wall within his story so he can argue with Bob and Larry about forgiving the grapes again. And this is not even including the context of that quote over there, which I will leave a secret for those who don't know about it because it has to be seen to be believed. Needless to say, Bob and Larry run the full gamut of colorful emotions during this episode. In fact, that is why the Bobcons were created using the expressions that Bob makes on the countertop during this episode, which I guess brings me to the animation. I said that I thought the first episode had animation that held up well, and honestly, there's not much difference here. The character models do seem to be revised a little bit, with the main thing being, at least to my eyes, is that the character models seem a bit larger. I still haven't decided if I prefer this change, though. However, what is a welcome change is that the episode appears to have undergone a more effective mastering procedure when compared to the first episode. Since the first episode was made at a breakneck pace in order to meet the Christmas deadline, the mastering job might very well have been rushed, whereas this episode, made under no such deadline, makes this episode look much cleaner. Again, at least to my eyes. Overall, though, the fidelity of everything has not made a massive jump in the 8 months between the first video's release and this, but it is the techniques that the animators utilized that made the character models even more expressive and, again, even more pleasing to look at. This is in addition to extra touches that the animators added, like how they had Junior do a backflip and how they had QWERTY bounce around while playing Pong, which was really hilarious. But back to the first segment, it is the countertop segments that are stuck in the middle of the first story that we have two verses instead of one. Bob and Larry went to QWERTY in order to figure out how many times people are expected to forgive others. Bob guessed 7 times and thus got the verse about not 7 times but 70 times 7. Rosie, one of the new characters that I will get to later, got the correct answer of that being a grand total of 490 times. And since Junior forgave the two child grapes twice in the episode, that means that he can forgive them 488 more times. But hey, who's counting? Am I right? Well, that's actually kind of the point. Jesus threw out a ridiculous number of times that someone is supposed to forgive someone else because you are not supposed to keep track of that sort of thing. It seems really unlikely to me that someone would ever need to forgive someone else nearly 500 times, but even if they do, that doesn't matter. Jesus never stops forgiving us, therefore, we should never stop forgiving other people. Of course, that does not put into context about how seriously other people hurt us, which is where the second segment comes in. In that story, Larry crashes his and Bob's boat on a rock in the middle of the ocean, stranding the veggies on an island in the middle of nowhere with no way to get back to civilization. They really should be dead if you think about it. However, Larry shows that he really regrets his actions and the others learn to forgive him since he did not mean to get them in this mess. And since this is a Gilligan's Island spoof, ridiculous things can be created by characters, including vegetables with no limbs, like catapults and helicopters that can bring the veggies back to safety. But this is only after a song is sung, led by a talking tree with singing coconuts. This is in addition to the sentient trees that are shown during the song of the first segment, one of which was about to drink a milkshake, and the other of which uses his tree legs to jump in a pond in an effort to avoid hillbilly grapes. Have I mentioned that this episode is silly? In fact, it might even be a bit too silly. Don't get me wrong, the first episode was silly as well, but it still had enough humanity within it to still feel like a wholesome product with a powerful message. Here, while the message is still definitely very good, it is surrounded by stories that are just a bit more nonsensical that ultimately makes it just a bit harder for me to take it more seriously. And I know, talking vegetables and all that, but the first episode had a subtle charm that just doesn't feel present here, and the songs here honestly feel the same way to me. Again, they are very good on their own, but they do feel like a tiny step down when compared to the songs from the first episode. Admittedly, maybe that's because the songs from the very first episode were so good in such a unique way that would be hard to top, but since VeggieTales would top those songs later down the line, it does make these songs feel a bit more standard, even if they are bops in their own right. I do get why this was done, though. The first episode sold very poorly, so this episode was probably made with the intention of it being a bit more mainstream. Did it work? Well, yeah, the episode is very fun in its own right, but it does seem like there might still be a bit of growing pains, so to speak, within the production house. But let's get back to the new characters. This episode introduces several new fruits and veggies to bounce around with. However, only one of them would become a mainstay. Pa Grape is the old timer of the veggie crew. He speaks with an accent that has within it a bit of New York and, dare I say, a bit Jewish? Is it time for the Holy Land to call talking vegetable heresy? Well, his accent would slowly change over time to something more standard elderly, but one can only guess why that change was made. As for the other grapes, outside of the Veggie Christmas album that hit store shelves 2 years later, they would drop off the face of the kitchen after this episode. Again, as standard hillbilly characters, it isn't too surprising that these grapes had a short shelf life. And Palmy the palm tree, despite having a voice that is literally the exact opposite of the grapes, also did not come back after this episode, except for, again, the aforementioned Veggie Christmas album. Again, when early on in a series, you've got to throw stuff at a wall and see what sticks, and these characters went the way of the pair from the first episode. There will be more mainstay characters to be introduced later on, including two veggies that have something in common with Shaggy and Scooby, but that will be a topic for the next episode. Now, if you notice the extra verse on the right side of the screen when compared to the first review, you might have noticed something missing from the side of the screen that was in the first review. That's right, this episode does not have a silly song. It was never the intention of the creators of VeggieTales to have a silly song in every episode, but rather to just do silly things in the middle of the videos. This one is a parody of an SNL sketch, which is about a product that you can buy for $20 that can also become a chia pet and make julienne fries. Yeah, don't think too hard about that. Oh, and it also comes with steak knives. Yeah, it's still definitely silly, but at least it still ties in with the moral of the episode, so it's not as silly as the silly songs. And for this episode in particular, that's probably for the best. And that's the second episode of VeggieTales. You know, since these episodes come out months apart and were originally released on tape instead of screened on network television, they often feel like mini movies as opposed to an ongoing TV series, and this feeling will increase as the episodes get longer. And is often the case with movies, the second film in a film series is often a steep drop off in terms of quality, but that is definitely not the case here. This episode is just as chock full of Sunday morning values and Saturday morning fun as the first episode, all while introducing a fun new character, bringing classic literature and pop culture spoofs into the mix, and giving us a nice one off segment in the middle of it all. However, while it is still all around solid, the first episode holds more weight to me. I went into personal details there, but simply put, that episode's message and how it was packaged got to me on a deeper level. While this episode felt like a bright and breezy experience with a message nicely snuggled within it all. Easily a fresh experience from start to finish, no doubt about that, but it does rank just ever so slightly below the first episode. I value this episode for making me laugh with its silliness, all while still having a moral, but the best is yet to come. I am sure of it. This has been the second episode of every episode of VeggieTales Reviewed, where my goal is to review the entirety of the series designed to let everyone know that God made them special and He loves them very much. Tune in next time to hear me talk about episode 3 Are You My Neighbor? Until then, thank you so much for watching. Click the red button to subscribe and have a fantastic rest of your day doing whatever.